Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Laurian Farrell. Laurian is the Director of North America for the Resilient Cities Network. That organization came from the 100 Resilient Cities program that was basically shut down and moved into a new phase. I'm talking to Laurian today about the work they're doing, in particular around resilient recovery for communities post-COVID, and looking at how resilience can be embedded in any recovery process for communities in the future. So stay tuned as I talk to Laurian about the work they're doing and how you can find out more. Hey, Laurian, how are you doing today?
Hi, Leanne. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, before we get started, can you just talk a little bit about yourself, your background?
Sure. I grew up in Toronto. I have been in New York for about 2 years now. I am the daughter of a Trinidadian educator and a Welsh nurse, and spent most of my career working in or around cities. My training formally is as a water resources engineer and as a landscape architect. I did my master's in landscape architecture, and through my work, I love water. Anything to do with water gets me really excited, and I'm passionate about water. But in working through water, I realized that we could design better water systems if we paid more attention to people and how people used the systems that we built for them. And that brought me to this field of resilience, and ultimately, concurrent to marrying a New Yorker, brought me to New York to work at 100 Resilient Cities and now the Resilient Cities Network.
So tell me a little bit about the Resilient Cities Network. I know it's relatively new, but why was it founded? What's its mandate?
Yeah, so the Resilient Cities Network is about a year old now. We are the continuing legacy of 100 Resilient Cities. We are the world's leading urban resilience practitioners network, and we have cities in 5 regions around the globe: in Asia Pacific, in Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, Europe and the Middle East, and North America, which is the team that I work with. And in North America, we have 24 cities in the United States, 4 in Canada. And our goal is really to support cities in continuing the legacy of the work they started with 100 Resilient Cities, which was to create a resilient strategy. But now we're really focusing on implementing those strategies. And the goal is to make cities better able to face shocks and stresses that we face. This year, 2020, has been a perfect example of how we don't just get hit with one shock or stress at a time. There are cascading impacts, and resilience is all about how do you deal with those events that are happening in cities and come out on the other side, not just surviving, but actually doing better from having learned lessons and being able to thrive. Also, though, the really critical point is making sure that everyone is included in these plans, so that the most poor and vulnerable are also brought along with us, because we know it's the most poor and vulnerable that are most heavily affected by these shocks and stresses in cities.
Mm-hmm. So in your work, both current and previously, you must have seen a lot of things that were doing well. Some places are not doing so well. Just curious, what would stand out in your head at communities that get it? Communities that are actually getting this whole resilience thing right.
Yeah, and one size does not fit all when it comes to resilience. Different cities have different ways of showing their success and different things that work for them. I would say that the cities that have really embraced resilience and found the most benefit from going through the process of developing strategies were those mid-sized cities that were able to push through bureaucracy and just get down to the work and really embrace resilience as a culture across the organization. Resilience is not easy. It takes a lot of dedication to really take a hard look at yourself, your systems, and identify what's not working and what needs to be changed, and then to break down silos. But those cities that could really take an honest look at their challenges, break down silos, and come up with solutions that met the needs across divisions were the successful ones. And I'll give you an example. The city of Boston was fantastic at this. They realized early in their resilience journey that they could never be resilient if they didn't address their racial equity problems. And so racial equity was front and center of their resilience strategy. There are many, many other cities, though, across the world that did fantastic things as well. Medellin in Colombia had a really innovative resilience school program, which started off as a infrastructure program to look at how do they make their schools more prepared for seismic activities, and so they would be more resistant, but ended up being a holistic community engagement approach where not only did they build more stronger structures, but they in the community took ownership of the schools. The education rates that were extremely poor in terms of the students' ability to pass, say, math tests at the standard levels became exponentially better because of the approach that was taken, the resilience approach to invest in resilient school systems, resilient curriculum, resilient communities. And so by layering up all of these different factors of city life, but also individuals' lives, they were able to have incredible outcomes for the community and for the students, which will only translate into better outcomes down the road as those students grow up and become contributors to the society. I have 100 examples, but those are the two that always come to mind to me first, because they're very powerful examples of what you can do if you take this cultural resilience approach to working together.
And I think that's part of it. I think when you're talking to communities, and if resilience is over there and it's someone else's job, I think then you're siloing resilience. It almost has to be that embedding into everything you do. And then you start to see what it's about and how it's making an impact. And I know that's some of the work that you do. It's that, how do you embed that into it's a culture? It's there's measurables. There's things you have to track over time.
You've got it. Yeah, 100%. And so I think, to get back to your previous question, what didn't work in cities is when cities had chief resilience officers that their job was sort of seen as, this work is in this lane, stay in your lane. But it's not. Resilience really has to permeate across cultures. And the city of Houston, actually Mayor Turner in the city of Houston is our board chair now. We're really excited about that. The chief resilience officer there has ensured that they can achieve this cultural approach to resilience by having a chief resilience officer in every single department. And she also instituted that same approach in the city of Los Angeles, which she was the first chief resilience officer in Los Angeles and now Houston. So I think that's a fantastic model that works for some cities that others could explore.
Yeah. So when you think about COVID, and obviously we've been COVID outed all year, it's been the focus. But just, a lot of communities, I think they're being really stretched for resources. So, they're going to have to make some really tough choices going forward. And so, how do you make the case to them that, if you've got three things you can focus on, resilience needs to be one of those. Like, how do you help build that case for people with limited resources, and maybe look at this whole area as overwhelming, as something, I couldn't possibly do that? Just some advice.
I think the answer is you cannot not do it. You must be thinking about resilience if you want to have a safe and equitable future for your communities. And it's not an either or thing, resilience. It's, like I mentioned, it's a culture. It's an approach. And so the pandemic is a fantastic example, because when the pandemic hit in March and cities quickly, had to respond and do all of the things that cities do really well in standing up emergency management systems. But many of the workers, staff in cities immediately started thinking about a recovery. And what does that look like? And our chief resilience officers were saying, how can we make this a resilient recovery? And so rather than talking about what's the recovery from a pandemic, it was, what is a resilient recovery from a pandemic? And you can use this sort of language, which is a bit of a nuance, but it's important. So how do you recover from a pandemic through resilience? In the United States, we're talking a lot about racial equity we can't ignore the racial equity problem in the United States anymore. How do we achieve racial equity through resilience? Any disaster, shock, or stress that we have, we can talk about it through resilience. How do we deal with economic recovery? Through resilience. The resilience is a lens that we can apply to all of our challenges, and it provides a roadmap for us to make sure that we're first and foremost achieving co-benefits on everything we touch. So when the problem is an economic one, and all cities are going to be facing these fiscal restraints as we move forward, what resilience allows you to do is find $1.30 worth of value in every dollar you spend, because you're finding that the collaborative work, the co-benefits, the achieving multiple outcomes, multiple goals, but by touching something once or twice, by bringing people together, by collaborating in common goals. And so I would say resilience is not one of the three things that cities could do. It is something that will be applied across all of the things that cities do. And it helps us change the trajectory from, recovering from a shock or stress. You have a downturn and then you start to slowly recover. But if you approach it as a resilience recovery, that trajectory that you take in your recovery can be a better trajectory that will get you to those outcomes that'll be serving your population in the way they truly need it.
That's great. Yeah, no, and you're right. Like you brought it back again to, you can't have resilience over there. It's that, over, if you got three priorities, this has got to be embedded into those three priorities and how you approach them. So just before we wrap up, where would someone go to get some resources, some really good resources on the work that you guys are doing, some of the best practices, examples?
Well, the simplest thing is to go to our website, resilientcitiesnetwork.org. There are a lot of resources there. Also carried forward are some of the resources from the 100 Resilient Cities Days. And the next thing I would really highly recommend is to get in touch with the Chief Resilience Officer in a city, if you live in one of our cities, or in a city that's near one of our cities. Get in touch with them and just talk to them about what they're working on, what you're working on, how you can work together, how what you need can be addressed within your city through their work. I find the Chief Resilience Officers are extremely open and innovative and willing to partner. So I think that would be a wonderful thing to do.
That's great. So before we wrap up, any last comments, anything I might not have asked you about you want to mention?
Well, I mentioned it, I alluded to it earlier, but how racial equity is top of mind these days, and as it should be, and was not always easy to talk about in cities, but it is something that we are really focusing on in the North America region right now. And if you go to our website, the resilientcitiesnetwork.org, you'll see a section on communities. And we've just started a community of practice on racial equity through resilience. The goal being our Chief Resilience Officers work in cities. We know cities, we understand the systems, and we also understand that there are systems that are oppressive and need to be changed. But sometimes, we're so used to working in these systems, we don't even realize what some of the outcomes are, the detrimental outcomes that are being caused. So we're committed to taking a hard look at the systems in our cities and providing practical solutions to start to combat anti-Black racist systemic policies. So I would welcome anyone to go to the website to join with us in these discussions, because is a type of work that takes all hands on deck. But we are very committed to doing this work, and so that is there, and we'll be evolving with more information coming over the next year. But if anyone's interested in working with us, we would love to hear from you.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I will put a link to your website in the video description, and hopefully people will come and learn more about what you're doing and start applying it in their own communities. So congratulations on the work you're doing.
Thank you, Leanne. Lovely to talk to you today.
You too.